Hello, what's poppin'? We are on Twitch. We are not live, but you can leave a like, comment, subscribe, turn on your post notification bells, man. Let's continue to grow the family from Chicago to the UK, man. Right behind me, you see it. Warning screen. Won't need it, but it's there. Like doing my little intros on something other than the regular screen. Twitch.com is where you can catch a live stream. Usernames at the bottom. We also got Patreon where we post 5 to 10 videos a week. UK Premier League highlights, UK TV shows, UK movies occasionally, very occasionally, in fact, seldomly. This is Caspian Report. How the UK is becoming a third world economy.
Copyright disclaimer. Under Section 107 of the Copyright Act 1976, allowance is made for fair use for purposes such as criticism, comment, news reporting, teaching, scholarship, and research. Fair use is a use permitted by copyright statute that might otherwise be infringing. Non-profit, educational or personal use tips the balance in favor of fair use. No copyright infringement intended. All rights belong to their respective owners.
Talk to me.
London, the city of dreams and one of the wealthiest urban areas in the world.
My bad.
Its economy is worth roughly £508 billion, which equals $652 billion. If it were an independent state, London would rank as the 22nd largest economy in the world, precisely above Argentina and Sweden. However, London's prosperity and that of Southeast England...
Who was number one in this list? The United States? Oh, okay. Well.
and Sweden. However, London's prosperity and that of Southeast England is atypical for the country. This small area makes up nearly half the UK's GDP while having about a third of its population. If one were to amputate London's output, it would reduce British living standards by 14%, just enough to slip ahead of the US state of Mississippi. Yeah, the UK has seen...
And Mississippi is down bad, ain't they? I ain't never heard nothing. All I know Mississippi for is MISSISSIPPI. That's all I really know.
Better days. The last 10 years have been particularly tough. Real disposable income, which...
And the river.
The last 10 years have been particularly tough. Real disposable income, which is income after taxes and benefits, has remained almost unchanged. The cost of goods and services has gone up. Compared to a decade ago, people can buy less with their income. Meanwhile,
Yeah, man, I remember we used to go to the grocery stores with $50, cart be full. $50 get you about 5 items if you lucky.
Activity is low, one of the lowest of any major economy, and housing has become nearly unaffordable, with the UK holding the record for the highest number of homeless people in the developed world. The cause for these...
Really? Approximately 1 in 50 Londoners are in the developed world? London has the most homeless...
For the highest number of homeless people in the developed world.
I ain't know that.
The cause for these issues is rooted in past political decisions. Britain has slumbered and stumbled its way through a number of setbacks. Now, the crisis has become endemic with no quick fix in sight. When you think about it, it's ironic. The UK was the first country to industrialize. Now, it stands to become the first to deindustrialize. Seen
trendsetter.
From a larger angle, Britain's economy is on a downward trajectory. Prices are rising too fast. Just recently, housing prices rose by more than £2,200 in a month. Unfortunately, this wasn't widely reported in the media. Looking at things from all angles is what we do, and Ground News provides us with invaluable insights to do exactly that. That's why we reached out to them to sponsor this video. In fact, reading this on Ground News,
I'm not even gonna lie, this was a strategically placed ad.
Can see only 10 sources covered it, which goes to show how overlooked this subject is. What's more, less than 10% of the outlets were from government sources. One might suppose governments don't want to talk about complications at home. Now,
but the government show talk about pitting the country's people against each other, man. That's tough.
our type of content is not really suitable for YouTube. The algorithm deems it too controversial, and so many of our videos go without monetization. That's why we rely on sponsors to keep producing these videos. We've personally used...
I ain't gonna lie, this gotta be one of the best in video ads. Like, I just watched a good amount of it because I didn't even know it was an in video ad.
You get breaking news covering /Caspian. I recommend subscribing, that by subscribing you are directly supporting our channel. Not long ago, Britain was considered one of the world's most prosperous nations and a prime destination for skilled professionals seeking to advance their careers.
I mean, it's still a prime destination, but not for skilled professionals as of late.
Today, not so much. The state is under incredible socio-economic strain, more so than people realize. 3 back-to-back geopolitical shockwaves have left it with a colossal debt: Brexit, COVID, and the Ukraine war.
Yeah, COVID.
The catalyst, however...
I'm glad they mentioned COVID, because COVID did a number on a lot of people when people forget the impact that COVID has caused.
Dates to 2008, when the financial crisis introduced long-lasting effects.
Yeah, like imagine Brexit, then COVID. Like that's back to back, that's tough.
Like everyone else, Britain was deeply injured, but the way it handled the fallout set it apart from the rest of the developed world. After borrowing roughly £141 billion to bail out British banks, the government opted for austerity measures instead of investing in fiscal and social policies. There were no significant tax cuts or minimum wage increases, there was no inflation control, no housing assistance, no job creation programs. You get the point. For ordinary citizens, the consequences were devastating. Real household income dropped and then flatlined for the next 15 years.
Yeah, it's ugly. Some of this going on in America too.
In economic terms, this is known as a lost decade. For added perspective, in 2007, the average British household was 8% less prosperous than those in Norway and just 6% behind those in the United States. In the years following, the deficit grew substantially. Today, British households sit 20% behind Norway and 16% behind the US in terms of real income.
Yeah, I guess y'all do got it worse than us comparably to this chart at least.
This drop in living standards is felt vividly among the middle class. Real household income is a fundamental driver of
the middle class is almost disappearing though throughout society.
Economic activity. It encourages consumer spending and improves living standards, all of which contribute to economic growth. In Britain, however, the government prioritized corporate interests above all else. But even here, in the corporate world, the gains were mostly short-term. The productivity rate was left on the back burner, and no significant investments were made in this domain. For context, increasing productivity is one of the most efficient ways to grow an economy. But, contrary to popular belief, improving productivity does not mean working harder. Instead, the point is to boost economic output without increasing the amount of work. So, when an agriculture-driven economy switches to manufacturing microchips, productivity increases because the tech industry is more profitable and has greater margins. Ergo, the workforce is getting more out of it for the same amount of labor. That's why Japan is turning farmland into factories. It adds to productivity and ultimately improves the economy.
Okay, I understand that, but farmland into factories? Wouldn't that, just imagine 100 years from now, Land is something you can't reproduce. So it's like, when that land is gone and you can't grow things in there anymore and the land is dead, where are we going to get food from? Is all our food going to be from factories? Genetically modified food 24/7?
In the UK,
or do they just plan to outsource it from somewhere else?
productivity output per capita debilitated after the 2008 crisis due to a lack of investment. This chart by the London School of Economics puts things into perspective. Before the crisis, productivity was growing at nearly 2% annually. After the crisis, however, it weakened substantially, changing a trend that had been in motion since the 1980s. The British workforce now has the second lowest productivity rate among the G7 economies, whereas before the 2008 crisis, it was second only to the US. The simultaneous effects of
who did it? Thatcher? Margaret?
Sluggish real household income and low productivity explain a lot about the performance of the British economy. It is essentially fighting for its life.
Paying
Britain's
dividends.
lost decade happened so casually, so indifferently, that none of its political parties acknowledged it, let alone addressed it. There was no political discourse on this subject that was affecting millions of households. But it was a crisis nonetheless, and so the discourse expressed itself in the form of Brexit. However, the uncertainty over Brexit made a bad situation even worse. It had a particularly sharp effect on direct foreign investment. According to the Bank of England, Brexit reduced investment by 25%, measured from 2016 to 2021. What's more, soon after Brexit...
So investment was the initial problem which brought Brexit to the forefront. And then once that happened and the UK left the EU, foreign investments dropped 25%. So you damned if you do, you damned if you don't.
Brexit, the onset of COVID exacerbated the economic crisis that was brewing underneath.
Yeah. So on top of Brexit, 3 years later, COVID hit. And then after COVID, probably there was like maybe a year of, okay, let's be generous and leave stuff low. And then after that, everything shot right back to the moon, like past where it was, price-wise.
The government stepped in and borrowed an additional £280 billion in its response to the coronavirus. This was deemed necessary to get the nation through the pandemic. But here's the thing, most of the COVID bailout was borrowed when interest rates were at historic lows, sitting around 0.1%. At the time, repayments were expected to be relatively manageable, and this might have been true were it not for the final nail in the coffin, the Ukraine war. The minute the Russians began their full-scale assault, access to Russian oil and gas was halted by sanctions and trade restrictions. At the same time, an energy crisis started brewing, and the cost of living jumped across Europe.
Isn't that being situated though? Like, what's his name? The Russian president is ready to sit down for negotiations to talk because Trump is back in office? Or is that like a rumor?
The crisis hit close to home. British households were projected to pay 3 times the previous price just to heat their homes during the winter. Much of the public was anxious, so the British government intervened again. This time, it was one of Europe's most generous in financial support. Between 60 billion and 100 billion pounds in additional spending went straight into Britain's debt. The damage to households was mild, but the bailout gave the UK its biggest increase in debt as a share of its GDP. The synthesized pandemic crisis and energy crisis pushed inflation rates to new highs. In response, central banks ramped up the interest rate.
Of course. Greed will do that. Greed to do that. It's like stuff normally go that high when you won't have a choice. the banks knew, oh, they don't got no choice. They gotta borrow it. So, oh yeah, we gonna push the interest rate. Oh yeah, it makes sense from the standpoint of I'm a bank. You know what I'm saying? I'm looking out for myself.
Ordinary citizens, this meant that mortgage payments went up overnight by hundreds of pounds. Meanwhile, for the government, the high interest rate added additional billions to the national debt. While before, debt repayments were believed to be relatively manageable, after the energy crisis, debt became increasingly expensive to pay off. Servicing debt jumped from £40 billion per year to about £100 billion per year. That is a staggering £60 billion increase in spending, which is nearly the entire British defense budget. So, yeah, although admirably, Britain's support to Ukraine essentially broke its economy. Britain's debt interest bill,
and they still paying them. They still supporting it though,
is now the country's second largest item of spending. The surge in debt has reduced available funds by tens of billions of pounds, limiting spending on other items. Nearly all the country's public services are affected by it, which then depreciates the quality public services can provide.
Part 3.
At its core, economics is about more than markets and money alone. It is about understanding the choices people make and how demographics drive those decisions. Economics is essentially the study of people, not just numbers. After the COVID lockdowns subsided and life returned to normal, every advanced economy witnessed a surge in the workforce. People found jobs and moved on with their lives. This chart shows the change in economic activity among the G7 nations between 2019 and 2023. Britain stands out. Its workforce never recovered. It just stayed low. A smaller workforce has all sorts of ripple effects. It means less taxes to pay for services like...
Yeah, man. The workforce never recovered. It went down. People figured like, man, I can still continue to get this help from the government. It's more beneficial for me to get the handouts from the government than to go back to work. I'm not getting paid as much going to work as I am collecting from the government.
Healthcare and greater expenditures on social benefits. It also means people have less money to spend, which hurts businesses and affects the number of jobs available in an economy. So the consequences go full circle. But Britain's
and some people, single parent households with moms that do that, like, oh man, I collect more from the government. Well, yeah. Going to work, collecting less, and still having to pay for childcare is insane. The thought of that is wild. Why would I go to work and break my back when I could get this free government assistance and take care of my kids and stay home like this? The choice is easy when you look at it from that perspective.
The problem goes much deeper than the missing 1%. Officially, unemployment in Britain is low by historical standards, sitting at 4.4%, which amounts to 1.5 million people. But reality paints a different picture. Britain's workforce is missing a staggering 11 million people. The government doesn't consider it unemployment though, calling it economically inactive instead. The reasoning is that this group, amounting to 9.4 million people, is technically not looking for work or is available to start a job. The Office for National Statistics explains the motives. About 2.1 million, aged between 16 and 24, are students and thus economically inactive. About 3.5 million of those over 50 years old are out of the workforce due to sickness and early retirement. Meanwhile, at least 1 million people aged between 25 and 49 years do not work because of caring responsibilities. A workforce missing 11 million
because of caring responsibilities. See, there it is.
People is no small matter, but businesses need to keep running regardless. This puts tremendous pressure on the government, and one way to offset the difference is by opening the borders. So British lawmakers did just that.
Also, that's why the borders are open. Let's see, that every action causes a reaction. I mean, every action has a reaction. Yeah. You might not be getting the desired effect. And then, but you know, the crazy part is they say, oh, you open the borders, the people coming in are taking our jobs. But apparently, when I'm looking at this, y'all didn't want it. 11 million people was opting out of them.
More people from outside the UK immigrated to the country to work, with South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa standing out. These migrant workers fill the gaps left by a reduced workforce. But simultaneously, the rapid and large-scale influx of immigrants has raised social tensions within the nation. People feel threatened by the changing ethnic demographics, and some lawmakers exploit such moods to score political goals. In early August 2024...
Yeah. The politicians don't really care. They're gonna rock with it just to get them votes.
Anti-immigration protests and riots rocked Britain, affecting over 20 towns. While the riots have... In early August 2024, anti-immigration protests and riots rocked...
It's crazy, bro. I remember watching this live. And now this picture is everywhere. I remember this garbage can flying up. I remember it.
Britain, affecting over 20 towns. While the riots have peaked, addressing the origins will take much longer to fix. In its entirety, Britain's economic chronicle, marked by a continuous decline, illustrates how one crisis triggers another and yet another, and ultimately leads to a chain of events from which there is no immediate relief. This is the bed that was made, and now people must sleep in it. On the plus side, every nation goes through ups and downs, and the UK is no exception. London is still one of the wealthiest and most innovative cities on the planet. Eventually, things will get better, but until then, Britain will function like a third world economy attached to London. I've been your host Shirvan from...
This is like Miami. Like when it comes to Florida and South Beach, they don't even consider themselves as part of Miami. They don't consider it a part of Florida or Miami. Yeah, I'm saying it right. It operates independently. Let the people tell it. So y'all leave a like, comment.